The Ethics of Judge Nadeau, Part 1, Chapter 4, Misery, read by Cynthia Magill. The book is written by Nancy Madore. She had gone back in time to the quiet little suburb where she grew up. Only this time, she was a shattered, penniless, single mom with 2 little children. Her divorce was still up in the air, and she still wasn't collecting any child support. Her husband still wasn't working, and she still had no idea where any of the marital assets were. Except their house, Mary Ann knew where that was. Upon hearing that she was shacking up with her attorney in their marital home, her ex-husband had stopped paying the mortgage and utilities. Mary Ann was forced to sell the house for a song, a mere $11,000 song. Or at least that's what she got when it was all said and done, as compared to the $80,000 they had put down on the house. After paying the past due bills, attorney number 2, and a moving van, she had just enough left over to take the kids out for pizza. For a job, she was managing a retail shop at the local mall. After rent, utilities, and food, she was only about $500 short each month, and thankfully, she had her mother to watch the kids. It was starting to sink in just how bleak her prospects were, though she was still holding out hope for the marital assets. Between the retirement fund, the severance pay, the stock options, the savings, and the cars, there had to be something coming to her and the kids. Her original fear that she would be alone for the rest of her life seemed a reality now. Her experience with Bob made this clear. Men would see her as an object to use. There was nothing more pathetic than a single mother. Her relationship with Bob almost seemed like the punchline of a joke now. As it turned out, she couldn't even trust the legal system. Her final appointment with attorney number 2 proved that. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to withdraw as your attorney," he said. "Why?" she asked, half expecting him to profess his undying love for her. Instead, he handed her a letter. In a final, devastating blow to Mary Ann's case, Bob sent Mary Ann, in care of attorney number 2, a 9-page letter that appeared to be some kind of lame attempt to exonerate himself of their affair. "Bob has made me a witness to facts relating to his legal misconduct," explained attorney number 2. Upon closer examination, it became apparent that the letter had nothing to do with Mary Ann. In it, Bob rewrote history again, adding a bunch more of the "as you knows," which I suppose were meant to give it credibility. He began with a lengthy explanation about how exemplary his handling of Mary Ann's case was, quoting Mary Ann's own praises from the letter he had asked her to write on his behalf. He even added a finding of facts, like you see in court pleadings, which went over every detail of their affair, point for point, from the sex they had in his office to his personal struggles, and then finally to his reasons for going back to his wife. Bob's letter was actually a response to something Mary Ann had done. Shortly after receiving his goodbye letter on her counter, Mary Ann went to see attorney number 2. He was about as surprised by this turn of events as I was. "When you told me about your engagement to Bob, it was clear that you had no idea what just happened to you," he said. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Well, your case was basically set aside while Bob pursued you," he said. Mary Ann began to cry. I mean, that appointment where he confessed his feelings and then seduced you, he went on. Do you realize you were billed for that? Mary Ann stopped crying. What? I still don't think you fully understand what's happened to you, he said. But what can I do about it, she asked. Well, I think you're well within your rights to file a grievance with the Board of Overseers of the bar, he said. And at the very least, you should be able to get your legal fees back. I mean, Bob really didn't do that much in the nearly 4 months that he represented you. He shook his head. I couldn't help noticing that he managed to file a motion to get your husband out of the house, though. Didn't you say he moved in the day after your husband left? Mary Ann sent an email to the bar that very day, telling them what happened, though she had yet to file a formal complaint. Vast promises regarding my own and my children's futures, not to mention damage to my divorce case by following his instruction to just get over with it so we could be married, has now come to a head, she wrote. And here she was, a week later, in her attorney's office because Bob had sent this letter. By sending it to me, he must have known that I would have to withdraw as your attorney, he explained. He hasn't once considered your needs as his client. And in his letter, Bob basically blamed Mary Ann for their affair, twisting her every move and action into some kind of a conspiracy to seduce him. He concluded, perhaps you are correct, that I could have and should have pushed you off me after you walked around my desk instead of out the office door. Yes, I was the lawyer, but I had already told you that I could not be your lawyer anymore, and you are an adult too. This would be the last time he would fail to push a woman off him. Bob also blamed attorney number 2 for filing his notice of withdrawal in Mary Ann's case, which he left in Mary Ann's file instead of filing it with the court himself, as he was supposed to do. Personally, I always felt that leaving his withdrawal notice in Mary Ann's file instead of mailing it to the court was an obvious attempt to create confusion over the date when he actually withdrew as her attorney. Bob knew that. As far as the law was concerned, he was still her attorney when he had sex with her that day in his office. And as for sending the letter to attorney number 2, I think Bob did that to discourage Mary Ann from filing a bar complaint. He was putting a whole new account of what happened on the record and making attorney number 2 a witness to it. Bob was creating evidence. Hence the ridiculous list of facts, which were anything but. Mary Ann did file the bar complaint, which became headline news that made her look like a vamp on the prowl instead of the naive and somewhat foolish divorcee that she was. What's more, she now had to find herself a third attorney to start over with. Were there even any assets left? I remember the bitterness she expressed over each and every payment she had to make to attorney number 3. So Mary Ann decided to move back to Pennsylvania. Actually, decided might be too strong a word. For her, I think it felt more like she had slunk back under the rock from which she had come. This is not a slight on Pennsylvania. We both love it there. It's really just a reflection of Mary Ann's state of mind and the circumstances of her return. She sent the kids ahead and began the arduous task of packing up all their belongings. I spent a great deal of time with Mary Ann during this period. She came to Newburyport almost every day, staying overnight occasionally at first, and then eventually staying for days at a time. This might have been fun under normal circumstances, but I had 2 deadlines looming over my head. One was to get my Harlequin manuscript in, and the other was to make the grand opening of my shoe store. As well, The fall shoe samples would be arriving any day, and I had to get ready for the upcoming shows. Looking back, I don't know how I pulled it all off, especially with Mary Ann following me around like a little lost kitten, going over and over the details of her affair with Bob. I didn't mind listening to her while I was painting walls, sorting shoes, or setting up inventory, but it was impossible to actually do anything that required my full attention, such as writing, when she was around. "Let's go out for a drinky," she would suggest constantly. I remember feeling like a guilty mother responding to a neglected child. "Just let me finish painting this wall and then we'll go to the starboard galley, and have drinks on the deck," I would tell her. Contented for the moment, she would resume her tirade against Bob. Strangely enough, even her tirades were entertaining. In fact, I remember that summer as one of the best of my life. The timing for a house guest was terrible, and I was experiencing a great deal of anxiety about all the things I had to get done. But I had never been so happy. There were so many exciting things going on: my upcoming book, my new retail store, and the latest shoes in my fall line. And I enjoyed having Mary Ann around, even people who didn't particularly care for her, like my boyfriend, had to grudgingly acknowledge how happy she made me. I couldn't be around her for 5 minutes without laughing. I can't even say why this was. I'm not sure that either of us is really all that funny. Maybe there was some chemical reaction between us that made everything seem funnier than it actually was. Sometimes it was just that whatever got us laughing was so unexpected, like when she fell into the bush. By the time I left for the Vegas shoe show, Mary Ann was a permanent fixture in my house. I remember her calling me at my hotel one night looking for sleeping pills. I told her where I kept them, and finding them, she hung up. But when she opened the bottle, out popped buttons. Mary Ann said she blinked several times to make sure she wasn't hallucinating. She even put the buttons back in the bottle and poured them out again, just to make sure they were still buttons. She called me back. "I think I must be going crazy because your sleeping pills look just like buttons," she said. "Oh my God," I explained, suddenly remembering the day I had gathered up all of my stray buttons and put them in an empty sleeping pill container. The weird thing is that I had been looking for a button right before my trip and I couldn't find one. I was wondering where they were. Mary Ann was still confused. "So I'm not crazy?" she asked. "They really are buttons?" This started us both laughing. I could picture Mary Ann pouring the contents of the sleeping bottles into her hand. I would have liked to have seen her expression as she stared down at the assorted buttons I've collected over the years. How confusing those first few moments must have been, and how ironic that the one and only time I can ever remember needing a button, I couldn't find one because they were tucked away in a bottle of sleeping pills. We had a good laugh over that, and later we would joke about the medicinal benefits of buttons. All it took was the mention of discomfort for Mary Ann to ask, "Would you like a button?" To this day, she swears she can't open a bottle of pills without expecting to see buttons pouring out. Even the most ordinary thing could get us laughing. My boyfriend and I often disagreed over how to fix the many problems with our house, which isn't all that unusual for couples, I guess. But it was the way we handled it that made us unique. I would present my case for the right way to do it, and then my boyfriend would do the opposite. Now, I know that sounds really arrogant, but I don't mean it that way. It wasn't even that my way was all that right, so much as it was my boyfriend's way being so wrong.
I'll give you an example. The staircase in our entryway had a tiny crack in the ceiling. And with all the major problems in that house, I can't really say why that little crack bugged my boyfriend so much, but it did. Personally, I was more concerned about the curtains blowing around when the windows were shut. Anyway, after puzzling over it several months, my boyfriend suggested that we cover the crack with a piece of trim. Yeah, you read that right. He wanted to nail a piece of trim to the ceiling to hide a little crack. It will look decorative, he said. Actually, it won't, I replied. But you're not even considering how low that ceiling is. A taller person might bump their head on the trim. And since my boyfriend didn't have a response for this, I assumed he had come to his senses at the time. Mary Ann happened to be there that day, and she and I spent the next few hours downstairs in the store. Later, as we were heading up that same staircase, I stopped her on the second step. "Look," I said, pointing to the ceiling in amazement. There was now a gaudy piece of trim where there used to be a tiny crack. Mary Ann and I burst into hysterical laughter. We tried to get it out of our systems before continuing up the stairs, in case my boyfriend was up there sulking because he thought we were laughing at him. Which, by the way, we were. We actually had to sit down, right there on the steps, which got us joking and laughing some more. Finally, we were ready to head upstairs, but as Mary Ann passed the trim, she couldn't resist pretending to bump her head on it, even though she was too short to reach it. "Ouch!" she cried, holding her head. This got us laughing all over again, and from that day on, until I moved out of that house, Mary Ann would often bump her head on that piece of trim. And there was never a time when it failed to bring back, in vivid detail, the hilarity of that incident for me. Besides Mary Ann, I had a stream of siblings and other friends constantly dropping by the store, which also kept the atmosphere cheerful. My brother, who's a local contractor, came in regularly to check on our progress, lend an expert opinion on, or sometimes just to poke fun at something my boyfriend did. My sons were there too, helping with the renovations. And anyone else with a few minutes to spare drop by to watch the show. Those were really good times. But the deadlines were drawing near, and there were all kinds of tasks that required my full attention. I needed time away, but Mary Ann couldn't bear to be alone that summer. I think she wanted to escape from her life, and my hectic existence provided just the thing. At one point, my family took turns taking her off my hands. I'm ashamed to admit that I even paid someone to take her out drinking a few times. That summer it occurred to me that I would have to put up boundaries where Mary Ann was concerned. This was nothing new for me. Being an arm's-length kind of girl anyway. But it was hard with Mary Ann. She was more like family than friend, and my arm's-length policy doesn't apply to family. In fact, family is where the codependent in me really gets to shine. I don't like to stand by and watch anyone suffer, but it is virtually impossible with family. I would much rather go through whatever it is myself. But no one in my family had been as needy as Mary Ann was that summer. I once got so frustrated I exclaimed, "It's either drinks or my store." She blinked as if considering it. "Just one little drinky," she pleaded. But the situation was temporary, so I roughed it out and then suddenly she was gone. And I was almost too busy catching up to miss her, but of course I did miss her. So Mary Ann went back to Pennsylvania, where she spent the next 2 years trying to fit into the role of a single working mother. But it was an uncomfortable fit. What's more, she had unfinished business up here in New England. And I'm not just talking about her bar complaint. She missed Bob. Or maybe it was her life in Maine that she missed. She had gone from the proverbial frying pan, marriage, into the fire, single motherhood, making a quick stop in paradise along the way. Personally, I felt that Marian's brief encounter with the perfect life was about as real as Bob's promises. Of course, remember, I wasn't there. I still hadn't met Bob, but I didn't need to look at his face to see the glaring flaws in his character. I saw a lawyer who would take incredible risks with the lives of his clients, and a man who was equally reckless with the lives of the people he claimed to care about. And I'm not just talking about Marian and her children. I think the same could be said for his wife and his children. Bob's letters, though contradictory in relation to his affair with Mary Ann, were actually very consistent in what they said about him. They were like a crystal ball into the future, providing a clear picture of a man whose reality would always be shifting to ensure two things. First, that he got what he wanted, and second, that he was never responsible for his own actions. Over these years, these two insights would prove as constant and as dependable as the tides that wash over our northeastern shores.